And so I think that's telling and kind of supports that Nesbitt bit. In terms of the accelerated program that we're doing, you heard Dean talk about the dismal numbers for these types of students. Well, we're having tremendous success. In 2010, our cohort, 30 some odd students, 75% passed transfer level English within a year after leaving our program. So that's kind of amazing. Yep. And I think the online environment allows them to do that.
Yep. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate that you bring up the whole subject of structure, because that's one thing that we see quite often in online, particularly for younger students, is the need for that structure. But Wayne, I'd like to hand it to you.
Thank you for inviting me here today. I am too a product of the community college system. I walked to LA City College and then took the bus to Cal State Northridge. I teach mostly business courses, and I'm in the management department, so I teach mostly org behavior, negotiation, leadership, that kind of stuff. But I do other things as well. I volunteer to teach freshmen, student athletes. I also teach Shakespeare. I teach mostly in the traditional format, but I do increasingly some online work. We do a lot of hybrid work, and that's about it. We don't do too much online. We have a little bit of online in the College of Business for tech-oriented courses like finance and a little bit in operations. But for the qualitative reasoning courses like management, marketing, and law, the faculty, at least in the business side, have decided that those are work better in traditional formats or occasionally hybrid formats. But there are plenty of other programs at Northridge that work online. Not just the master's program, but one that wasn't mentioned before is Upper Division Transfer General Education, to make sure that there are no bottlenecks in the transfer and that there's always places for the students in that particular place. What considerations do I give when I develop an online course? First of all, everything I do is in OpenCourseWare and Creative Commons, and has been that way for multiple years. My first course online was in 1993, and all the materials are like that. I'm not just talking about incorporating open educational resources, but making sure the syllabi, the course outline, and all the materials are licensed that way as well. And I think that that's really important. So adding stuff for online means making good prompts for the discussion questions. We are not quite at the place either at Northridge or in the CSU where we have real-time captioning like we heard before, where we can just send out a video and have it be captioned. That's a big deal at a place like Northridge, which has the largest collection of deaf students in the country, next to Gallaudet University. So this ability to deal with differently abled students is extremely important, but also very complicated task to do. So those are areas where I could use a little bit of help. I also do the programming in the college when a faculty member needs something customized, like replicating functionality in the Open Learning Initiative from Carnegie Mellon for the operations courses, doing things in R and Python that need to be then generated in test banks for Moodle and things like that. In general, for me to do a better job with students, I'm going to need more information about them. That helps with progression. Now, I told you before, everything that I do is up online in OpenCourseWare and is in months in advance, and everything's archived online too. So the students have access to all the information, but I actually don't know that much about the student to be able to help them in the matriculation process. And I'm not sure how to overcome the legal hurdles on that, not just for differently abled students, but for students who can matriculate at different speeds. One of the things that I've learned in the courses that I've taught is that the grade distributions can vary more widely in an online course, even in a hybrid course, than they can regularly. The grades are less nuanced, and I'm not sure exactly what that means over time, but it could mean something's not right, if that's true too. So we have to be very careful about what an A means, especially if somebody can retake the quizzes multiple times. That can help in the learning, but I'm not sure what it signals to employers. The other thing, and this is a research interest of mine, not just an educational interest, but the students do a great deal of writing, not just in my course, but in the other courses as well. And I know how to automate the drill and kill and other things in the quantitative reasoning, but knowing how to evaluate short answers and essays with technology is non-trivial. You need finite state transducers and latent semantic analysis, and we're not quite there yet. And so that's something that I'd like to do a Pearson and ETS have things for us, but I'm not sure it's good enough. So there's work to do in that area because I don't want to conflate technology with scale. Some parts of the learning process don't scale as readily as the others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wayne. And Meredith?
Great, thank you. I'm going to take this a bit up. As Executive Dean for the College of Education, I work with faculty across the college, and I also serve as interim provost for the university. So in thinking about how do we service the students' needs as well as our faculty needs online is something that's certainly part of every day in my world. One of the key fundamentals for us is a lot of faculty training on the front end. We utilize practitioner faculty, which is really key. Our students continue to express an interest in being engaged with practitioners consistently to understand what's relevant and what's currently happening in those fields that they're pursuing. And one of the things that was mentioned earlier is sometimes the skill sets of instructing in a classroom do not always translate to instructing online. So we spend a great deal of time in faculty training to help folks think about how are you facilitating. Classroom management online is certainly different than classroom management in a physically based environment. So there's a lot of training that goes in on the front end. And also understanding the commitment that it takes to facilitate online. It's a 24/7 opportunity to engage with folks. We all work in different paces and different times, and I might want to be up at 4 a.m. and you may want to be up at midnight. So how do we make sure that faculty understand the commitment of facilitating online and being available to students? Really, office hours never end, right? So there's a lot of time and engagement as well. We also hear from faculty that they oftentimes know those online students better and in more depth than they do students that may be in their face-to-face classes, because there's no opportunity to hide, if you will. In a face-to-face course, if you choose not to participate, if you choose not to raise your hand or engage, you can kind of be quiet in the back. In an online course, everyone's engaging, everyone's participating. Our platform is such that you're engaging around course materials and content actively all the time, whether it's an ebook or if it's a video collection, but that constant interaction and dialogue. And so faculty really say that they have the opportunity to know their students in a much more robust way. And I think the platform and the resources itself are really key to making sure that we're meeting the needs of all kinds of learners, whereas I really might want to engage with something that's visual because that's how I learn best. My fellow students may want to read some current information and literature, and that's easier for them because they would prefer it that way. It's fun for us to find tools that help engage students in a multitude of ways and also allow faculty to be able to utilize resources that are appropriate for the students in that particular course. So I think that the platform and the amount of dynamic resources that we make available for students and faculty have really created a really amazing cultural environment and also an environment for quality engagement between both sides. So just kind of some bigger picture perspective.
Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
before we turn you over to the students and as they get on your case, Pete, for your initial course, I did have one follow-up question. Wayne mentioned something interesting in the perspective of, since we're talking access with online education, you put a real emphasis on open educational resources, including syllabus, and making those generally available. That's an important part. Any others, is that an important consideration for any other people as part of how you look at online education? Any comments?
Got lots of microphones. I definitely agree with that. One of the things that I use in my classes are instructional videos extensively, because I feel like in the online environment, there's a great opportunity to draw people in when you can see another person. And a lot of times when you have that interaction, that changes the dynamics of the isolation feeling that we can have in distance education. So I use instructional videos, and all of those videos, I create them specifically for my courses that I teach, but I put them out on YouTube and they're open access. Anybody who wants them can use them. And I have instructors all over the place contacting me, can I use these in my course? I'm like, yes, they're on YouTube, they're free, they're out there, anybody who wants them can use them. So I think that idea of creating things that can be shared across disciplines, across schools, across, the ethos really is amazing part of where we sit with distance education and opportunity, and it creates amazing access. All of my videos are captioned, all of those kinds of things. And people who aren't even taking the class or taking any class are watching those videos and gaining education or knowledge from them. So I think there's definitely a lot of opportunity for sharing that can happen from these.
Yeah, so two interesting things, and I'm going to hand it over to the students. One is it's not just the cost of the material, but it's the collaboration of online best practices. I'm hearing both of those things. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Isa and the students.
All right, well, students, I'd love to know what stood out to you about what was just said and how does it relate to your experiences?
All right. Okay, so I really like all of you. Thank you. I don't know, engaged, excited faculty are just great people. So anyways, Wayne, well, I almost said things and that just wasn't gonna work. I don't know. I passed English, so I figured I better, utilize my vocabulary. Anyway, so Wayne mentioned, well, actually, first I want to tag onto that question about OER and kind of the Creative Commons phenomenon that's been happening. And as a student, and a lot of the students that I talk to and work with, it's really important for us to see our faculty engaged in kind of perpetual learning. And I think that the easiest way to do that is to look at what other faculty are doing, a lot of whom are practitioners or come recently from the field or go back and forth or whatever. And the mechanism to do that is Creative Commons and OER and sharing. And so I'm so down with that. And low cost, come on, really? So I'm just saying, $200 textbook, I don't even buy them anymore. Like, why am I going to pay? Anyways, so we're not going to talk about that. But
That's the next one.
but on the student records thing, I thought that was probably one of the most interesting things that I've heard all day. To me, I hadn't really connected that particular issue with online education, but it makes perfect sense. And relatively recently, there's been a conversation about transitioning records from K-12 rather than destroying them, burning them, and locking the ashes and then blowing up the ashes, that we would transition those into the other systems, that they would follow the students so that we could know more about the people that we're teaching. And I think that would be an invaluable asset, not only for online, but also in the classroom, especially online though. And then the last thing that stood out to me was the multiple methods of delivery that was talked about with online being a good mechanism or a good way to deliver content in different ways that the classroom just frankly limits you in how many ways you can deliver the material. And so I thought that was a really good point that online is, that's one area where it absolutely excels.
One question I had, well, in my research, I do a lot of work on access and equity in education. We talk a lot about access to different forms of education, traditionally in the classroom and online. But what strides have been made towards equality of outcomes? Like what strides do we make towards helping students finish the course and pass the course and gain the skills within online classes? I know there are some problems with that on the traditional side, but I'm really curious about the online side. How does that work on the online courses?
I'll jump in again. I just have to say, these are the kinds of questions that I love hearing from students, because they're the things that I strive for when I'm developing courses, again, with my passion being in instructional design. It's about how do we design courses that make sense to our students. Doing things the way that we've always done them doesn't mean it's the best way to do them today. And so when I work with my students, my courses that are online are probably very different than most of the people who teach in my discipline. I teach a lot of computer applications, and that's usually just, follow the textbook, turn in the assignment kind of stuff. But I've worked really hard to build in a lot of authentic assessments in my course, meaning how are you taking what you're doing in this course and applying it to the real world? And what does that mean to you? And not just write it in a paper. Create it in a video, do it as an electronic poster, write a song. However it comes to you to explain your understanding of the knowledge, do it. And then there's a rubric that says, okay, here are the things that you need to be able to demonstrate in however you do it. By using that common rubric, everybody gets assessed the same way, no matter what the product is that they're creating. So I think that's just one way we can look at, you know, creating access for people who have different skills and abilities. And just because you're really good at taking tests doesn't mean you know more about this subject. And I think that's an important message to get out.
Pete, get Suzanne first, and then Pete.
Well, I'd first like to address the first question over there. As land-grant universities, like the University of California, we are obviously very sort of regionally focused, but worldwide there is something going on like the internationalization of higher education. There's a global higher education revolution going on, and in the last 20 years, the percentage of students that are in developing countries is now 1/2, where it used to be 1/3. And so I actually completely agree with Wayne that we should do all of this open source so that our stuff scales up in a very peculiar way, namely not that one ethics teacher sort of develops a canned course that gets seen by everybody in the world, but that, for example, a professor in India could take my stuff, adjust it for whatever they have, the kinds of issues they have in India, which surely are somewhat different than the kinds of issues we are grappling with in California, and then develop a class with it, right? And I think, you know, in California, we're usually thinking of California students, which are obviously important enough, right? But I think we also do have to start thinking a little bit more internationally. And then my second response now to your question. So people sometimes ask me if my class would work for students at other universities or university levels and so forth. And there I have to say that I designed this class for a very particular set of students. Namely, I teach political science, and these are graduating seniors in political science. And for them, it works great, okay? But one has to, of course, keep in mind that by the time a student is a graduating senior in political science, that student has gone through an awful lot of selection, right? So first of all, he had to get into UCLA, and then she had to survive, you know, the first 3 years at UCLA, where you get socialized in all sorts of ways, right? And so in the way the class is currently designed, it probably would not work for high school students or just sort of random students somewhere, right? Which brings me to my next point, and that is we need to think more about, and I think people mentioned this in earlier sessions, the selection effects that go on, and then also the instructional design issues. So one thing I do is that I admit 200 students to my class, and then in the first 2 weeks, 50 drop out, but then the remaining 50 stick with it all the way to the end, and every one of them, and the grades are really good, right? And so 50 students basically decide, this format is not for me, right? And so we actually do at universities need to offer alternatives and acknowledge that students are very diverse. You know, one student wants to learn their stuff in a classroom, and another, incidentally, in the kinds of evaluations I got, they are very extreme, that there's students who say this is the best course I ever took at UCLA, and at the other extreme end, students who say, I will never take an online course again, right? And so the point is students are diverse, and the stuff we offer them has to be correspondingly diverse, right? And then finally, I completely disagree with whoever suggested that we should create a course on how to take an online course. I mean, first of all, it sounds like an incredibly dreary course to take. But the other thing is that when you think of the standard in design is to put the work into the instructional design so that the students can just sort of see what they have to do. So it's just like when you buy an Apple computer, for instance, and you open the box, and then you just sort of set up the computer, and it's kind of obvious what you need to do, and then all of a sudden it's up and running. Now, those of us who are 50 years old like me will remember the computers 20 years ago when you bought a new computer. It was just a pain in the neck, and you spent hours on end with customer support and so forth, right? So Apple put work into the design so that then the consumer has no work. And in the same way, we need to, in terms of the instructional design, we need to design our courses that the student just simply goes online, and it's kind of obvious what he needs to do. And if the student has a question, there's sort of a convenient box or something that he clicks on, and then it tells the student what to do. Yeah.
Thank you. And Pete, you had one point, and then we'll turn it back
Quickly, to answer your question, I don't think the technology is there yet to help my students, the remedial students. I think it's coming, it's down the road, and Wayne talked about, you know, you don't have a program that can grade essays, right? And so I think, you know, for the remedial students, which are the majority of the students in the state, you know, the technology isn't there for them to be solely online, that they need at least a hybrid model.
So students, as we finish up this session, I wanted to ask, do any of you have an example of an online professor or an online course that you really loved? And can you tell us about, what worked about it and what your professor did and sort of why you loved that course?
I can comment on that. I had an online course actually recently. It was in information system security, and that course, I have to say, was one of my favorite courses online. And I want to say that because they recently redesigned the online portal and the website. And so there's more tools available for me, like the online tutoring, the online tutorials on how to use PowerPoint or Word, and there's just more tools on there and collaboration. There's a new chat feature where students can chat with each other and actually interact that way. But I love the diversity. I love the having that. For me, the group work was my favorite as well, because I think having different opinions on certain assignments, having different views, gives you a broader perspective on other ideas other than just yourselves. And that was my experience online. So,
Nancy.
One of the courses that I took that was not only online, but it was also an instructional class physically, was a linguistics class. And I believe that I wouldn't have had the same experience at all if it wouldn't have been for the online. There was a lot that gave examples of videos of how people spoke of different countries and the language. And I believe that if it wasn't for that online experience, I would have never passed that class. And I have people that have taken that same class just physically, and they didn't pass the class because the online experience added something completely that you wouldn't have gotten just taking it physically. So.
Time for one more. I'd love to actually ask our faculty if you have a question that you'd like to ask the students while you're here.
This will be graded.
How did you stay motivated when you took online classes? What really helped you to make sure? You talked about Sunday night, right? That dreaded, I better log on, right? What helped you? What skills do students need to complete online courses?
I would say it has to be the flexibility component. I have to agree with Dwayne on that. Because I know today, by Friday at 10 p.m., I have some assignments due for my online class. So after this, I got to rush on home to meet that deadline. But, that flexibility is what helps in the instructor always just giving those updates instead of just, these are the directions, here's the syllabus, but they're checking in weekly. Hey, this is what you need to do. Or, hey, I haven't gotten a lot of this, or do you need help with this? And not only here's my office number, here's INIT support and all that stuff. So having the professor just constantly engaging with the students, that's always kind of helps with keeping me motivated with the online course.
Yeah, actually, just see if any more, Nancy.
I also think that what's very important for faculty to acknowledge is that a lot of us that do take online classes, it's because we have a busy schedule. So those reminders are the best thing. Sometimes it could be a deadline at midnight, but you get that reminder at 10 p.m. or something. And you're like, oh, I need to turn that in. So I believe that those reminders are really the best that a faculty member could do.
Sure. And Anna, you had one more question?
Yeah. I was just wondering, in any of the online classes that you've taken, did any of the faculty use video and or social media to enhance the courses, and what impact did that have?
Yeah, that was another thing I was going to say, Anna. Your example of YouTube and stuff, I think that's what makes a good feeling about the online courses, when the professor's like, here, check out this YouTube link, and this video explains this, and then here's a link to this Los Angeles Times article, or this CNN news clip about this. That's always the best feeling, because it just makes you, for a lot of students, if you're not online for homework, you're online for social media, Facebook, Twitter, so you can see oh my gosh, this information is just out there. So when you make those connections for students, that's the best thing, and I encourage that the faculty always continue to kind of use those like-minded, open-based stuff to connect to what you're trying to get across in your lessons.
Rich? Just very quickly. Very quick. There we go. Very quickly, one of my professors that I took an in-person class with, but he was talking to me about a tool that he used called SoundCloud, which is something a lot of artists use to post their music. But he would post lectures and students can comment on specific points in the lecture, and everybody in the class can see that. And that may be a tool that you might look at. He's been very successful using it.
Okay. Well,
Follow-up question.
Yes.
It does sound like online education will not scale up, though, because everything that you're saying suggests that there has to be a faculty presence.
Yes.
yeah. Yeah. And actually, so I want to thank this panel. This has been an excellent discussion, so thank you very much. I would like to point out, I think that 20 Million Minds stacked the deck, however, but it's excellent to hear. I mean, think of how motivational it is to have faculty who are engaged in the topic and trying to figure out how learning best works with this medium, and the feedback of learning what works and doesn't work. So I applaud. This is an excellent panel. Thank you very much. All right, as we're switching panels, I got a note from my wife that I'm saying too much and I picked the wrong tie this morning. I was going to point out to her, if she were tweeting that, I would actually have seen that comment earlier over there. So 20mm Evolve is a hashtag for people who want to tweet. A lot of great conversations going on here today. All right, so for our final panel, I want to bring up Scott Lay, President and CEO of the Community College League, Michelle Siqueiros, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, Executive Director, the Campaign for College Opportunity, and Debbie Cochrane, the Research Director from the Institute for College Access and Success. And we're going to be looking a little bit more at the policy level with this panel. So basically, what policy recommendations can support online learning? And some of the questions we're going to be asking the panelists to, see, I just did. Some of the questions we're going to be getting the panelists to address are, what are the current state of higher education, in particular for the access, the demographics we're looking at, in particular for Latino and African American students? And how do you think online education can best help and support students to be successful in their endeavors? And I just want to go back also to, as we keep talking about a lot of the entry-level issues, the remedial education issues, the roadblocks that we have in higher education, what policy issues can help us address removing these roadblocks or giving aid to getting people over these roadblocks? So with that, I'd like to start this panel, and I'll start off with Michelle.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I told my daughter, who's 11, that I was coming to talk about technology in higher ed, and I asked her what she thought. And she said, well, that's great, because every job you need technology and you need a computer. She's like, but it's also terrible, because students only play games on those things, right, Mom? Coming from an 11-year-old that loves her Kindle and appreciates technology far too much as well. So anyway, thanks for having me. I'm hoping that I don't sound too dreary, but they asked me to tell you or talk to you a little bit about the state of higher education in California. And that's not why I'm wearing black, but I think it is very frustrating and disappointing that we live in, I think, one of the best states in the nation, and that our higher education system isn't as well funded, isn't as successful, in spite of it being actually pretty fabulous at the same time, right? I think many of you in this space know that there is a projected shortage. We are simply not keeping up with the demand for educated workers. And many studies have pointed out to this. 2.3 million more college graduates is what we need by 2025. 2.3 million more. And that includes all of those with a bachelor's degree, as well as certificates and associate degrees from community colleges. And I just wanted to show you a few slides that kind of tell you some of the challenges we face and opportunities. We have a growing young adult population in California, so what's exciting is in some states they don't even have enough young people to educate. That's certainly not our problem in California. But the demographics look different. We are soon to be a majority Latino state. In fact, today, if you look at all of those young people under 18, 1 in 2 are Latino. And this next slide is especially troubling when we look, or we know that fact, because this will show you sort of what educational attainment looks like for all Californians and for Latinos in particular. We only have, amongst Latinos over 25, only 11% have a baccalaureate degree. So 1 in 2 young people are Latino in California, and we have the lowest educational attainment. 41% have no high school diploma or anything equivalent. The next chart just shows you what educational attainment is for whites, followed by African Americans in our state. And here it's, I think, really interesting that we have a lot of African Americans in California that have some college, means they went to college, but they didn't complete or earn a certificate or degree. And finally, Asian Pacific Islanders. So we're on track essentially to produce a generation of young people that are less educated than we are, which is, I think, pretty tragic. And here you can see what the completion rates are by community college, Cal State, and UC. So while some of the good news was reported early or last year that Latinos are going to college in higher and higher numbers, unfortunately they're not completing college. And the majority of them are going to community college where they're least likely to complete college. So those are some of the challenges that we face, and certainly I think when we released, and actually we have an infographic on some of the key findings of these 2 reports. We did one on the state of Latinos in California higher ed, the state of African Americans in California higher ed, and also broken down by gender, because then folks started asking us, well, what's the difference by gender amongst Black women and men and Latino women and men? So we have those reports on our website at collegecampaign.org. You can actually pick up an infographic on your way out today as well. And next week, we're going to be releasing another report on just how California is doing compared to other states. How many of you like being average? Well, that's how California is doing. We're doing average on most indicators of higher education attainment. And so here we are in the state that used to be kind of at the forefront of higher education, just doing average in terms of participation, in terms of completion, in terms of financing higher education. So I think all of those trends are trends that are certainly not acceptable in our minds. We are pushing for, at the Campaign for College Opportunity, the state, our state leaders to actually develop a plan. You know, your parents tell you, have a goal, because if you don't have a goal, you're probably not going to get there. And I think that's what's happening in California. We have no goal. We have no plan for what we want to do for higher education, for how we want to incorporate technology, how we're going to close gaps for students of color, and yet we think miraculously somehow we're going to get there. So we're hoping that developing a goal for our state will be something that all of you will join us in pushing for. And I've gotten the wrap-up sign, so I'm going to stop.
Yeah. Actually, before we move on, I did have one question to contrast 2 panels. Is there has been, Dean in his introduction talked about that there seems to have been a lot of change over the past year within the state as far as focusing on access. So what's your perspective on are we moving in the right direction? Are you starting to see a goal for the state with the use of technology over the last year and at the 3 systems? So I realize I'm putting you on the spot, but the 2 comments sort of run into each other.
I think, this year's proposed budget by the governor is certainly a move in the right direction. We have more funding for higher education. There's some indications in the budget around improving outcomes and success. I think you have a governor that supports technology and using that effectively to improve the throughput of students. So I think we are moving in the right direction. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, you couldn't really talk about student success the way everybody is talking about student success, without some folks feeling very defensive about talking about student success, that somehow it means that we want to close off access. Well, no, in my opinion, the goal when we want students to go to college, we want them to go there so that they can get something that will make them more productive, will allow them to step into the middle class. And so I don't think that they're mutually exclusive goals. And I'm very excited by, I think, the direction of the state. And here's an opportunity now that we're out of this recession to do even more. but there's still no plan, so that part is still a challenge.
Okay, thank you. Debbie?
Thanks. I'm Debbie Cochran with TICAS. For those of you who aren't familiar with TICAS, TICAS stands for the Institute for College Access and Success. We're based in Oakland, do research and policy work here in California and nationally on college cost and financing policy. We also do a lot of work specifically on community college students, and mostly because that's where the lowest income students tend to go to college. More than 40% of students nationally go to community colleges. 2/3 of students here in California go to community colleges. And one of the things that I know I am frequently asked when I'm talking about community college student access to aid is, why do people need access to aid when they're going to low-cost institutions? Why do they need that in California when fees are so low, when we have this fee waiver? Why should we be subsidizing their lunches at Wendy's? And what I try to say is, I want to be subsidizing their lunches at Wendy's if Wendy's is on campus or it's in the student union. I want them to be able to stay on campus between classes, to be able to buy their lunch there, on school, on site, so that they can better position themselves to go to campus office hours for faculty. They can spend more time in the library. I want to subsidize their transportation to and from campus so that they can get there and they don't have to make choices about whether or not they pay for that monthly bus pass or skip classes. So, I think all of those things really boil down to translating financial aid into a mechanism to promote student engagement. And we know student engagement is key to keeping students enrolled in college, doing well in college. So we have to support students' engagement. And I think here's where we kind of enter online education. And it's not that online education can't be engaging. Of course, it has to be engaging. But it doesn't happen on the natural like it does in traditional course formats. You have to really bake it in. You have to bake it in very intentionally. And sometimes I think by doing that, if you're going to do that well, you sometimes sidestep the original goals, like, for instance, making it cheaper. So, I think we've talked a lot about, time-saving strategies, and how online education or technology can make college easier. I think college, we need the perspective that college is supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be time-consuming. We want people spending time on college and on task. We want the students to have the time to study. And so we have to make sure that online education and the use of technology is not undermining those goals. I think from a policy question, I think our kind of broad panel was to talk about, generally policy recommendations. And I think the biggest recommendations that I would have is to be very thoughtful about what solution you're trying to come up with. What is the problem that you want to solve? Is it enabling more students to go to college so that we can just increase the numbers of people enrolled? Is it providing some key targeted courses to ease some of the bottlenecks in our public institutions? Is it delivering education in a more cost-effective way? Is it reaching 21st century students in a way that they're more accustomed to? All of these are serious issues for California, for the nation. There's no smoking gun for any of them, but I think too frequently online education and technology is positioned as the smoking gun for all of them. And that's just not appropriate. I think we have to consider each one of those separately. We have to look very hard at the research on who succeeds where and how, and deliver our plan, come up with our plan appropriately. Certainly, for instance, there's no doubt that providing online education, spots in online universities creates more space for students to enroll in college, but is it really meaningful access? The University of Phoenix representative who was here earlier spoke about the tremendous number of low-income, underrepresented students that the University of Phoenix enrolls, which sounds really, really great. The problem is that the University of Phoenix online campus has a 4% graduation rate for the students who are seeking bachelor's degrees. Only 4% of the students who go to University of Phoenix online to get a bachelor's degree actually receive that bachelor's degree in 6 years. So that's a problem. And we really need to question whether that is meaningful access. How should we feel about the fact that hundreds of thousands of students are enrolling in this college, and disproportionately low-income, underrepresented students in higher education? So these are some of the ways that the solution, which might look great on the face, is not actually as straightforward or as great as it might seem.
Sure. So we definitely need to focus on success, and I'd like to turn it over to Scott.
Well, it's really redefining access, success, and equity, and Michelle was correct when she mentioned that, you know, we really have had a complete theme change, probably the last 4 to 5 years. I know we did our report on student success in 2010. Michelle's organization was doing some great work leading up to it, but that's really when things changed. And now that money is coming back, you know, it's really the time where we have to take a pause and say, how do we define student access, student success, and most importantly, student equity, which was something that people didn't even want to put on the table in the early success and access conversations. Michelle mentioned about her daughter and technology, and it reminds me, when I graduated law school in 2000, you know, we at UC Davis, we were all just doing, you know, pen and paper and everything, and now technology is in the classroom. And my wife teaches a local government class at UC Davis Law, and now everybody has laptops, and she teaches on Monday night. Well, you know what that means? Monday night football. And like when the Niners are playing, it's like everybody's down like this. So she actually changed when she does her class to the spring semester, so she only has to encounter that for, well, actually she didn't, because it started last week, we're already in playoffs. But it's actually thinking about those sorts of things, that technology comes with it, certain downsides to the educational experience. You've also seen as laptops have been introduced to the classroom in law schools, bar passage rates have gone down because students aren't doing the cognitive thinking and understanding and interacting with a faculty member, and they just sit there and transcribe. Even if they're not playing games or watching Monday Night Football, you get into a transcription as opposed to I hate to write. So what I write is going to be something very important, and I'm going to use my brain to determine what is important. But for far too long, the California community colleges and my associations, the Association of the 72 Community College Districts, we've defined access on the top line. That's what we care about, whether it's a local college president or whether it's a system chancellor or a person in my talking points role. Be like, we're so proud to serve 3 million students. What the hell does that mean? Our participation rate is 9.2%. We want to get it up to 10%. Well, who is being served and how are they being served? And that's where we turn to the success and equity questions. And I do think that there is a renewed attention being paid to success and equity, although I fear that the return of money will cause more division than we've seen in the last couple of years. And what we need to do is differentiate in technology and in student success between the efficiency, the throughput, for efficiency's sake. We have a capacity and a funding problem, therefore we need to get more students through faster. Well, a lot of community college leaders, faculty and staff in particular, will reject that. Our students need to take the time they need to complete, and it may take 6, 7 years to complete. And that may be the case, but we also have to understand that we're stealing from that student every day we keep them in college longer than they need to be. And that's where technology, I think, really can play a role in how do we assess, provide assessment review, and bring students up to college level much faster. The numbers that Michelle was sharing about African American and Latino students, the crime is for far too long. We've been underplacing students. We underplace students, number one, at the high school level when they're making college decisions. Oh, you know what? You'll be better off going to the local community college. Help your family business. And then if they go to the community college, we underplace them again. We are educationally lowballing students. And you know as well as I know that socioeconomic class and therefore race plays a very large role. And the transition from a low-fee state, perhaps a necessary transition from a low-fee state to a high fee, high aid state means that those that are the most connected, meaning the highest socioeconomic classes, meaning white and Asian students, are going to be disproportionately informed about their choices in higher education. And so that's what we really have to think about is, I get the question once in a while, I think my kid can go to Stanford, but they'll save a lot of money going to community college. Let me tell you, the financial decision always will say, go to Stanford. Stanford's going to take care of that kid from the day they walk on campus to the day they graduate. And I have to tell you, you're going to get lost in community college. And it's up to us, and we'll talk more about what we can do to use technology and use what we know to ensure a much better throughput, but for the right sake of success and equity.
Okay. One thing is we get into the student comments, and because there have been some pretty strong statements made, and I didn't get on your case, but I wanted to understand the difference of what I heard in earlier sessions and from what you're saying of not having a plan. I'd also like to, Debbie, you made some very strong statements. We have two student panelists. I wouldn't mind putting you on the spot, Joe and Melody, where you both attended the University of Phoenix. And so I don't want to get into a debate on the University of Phoenix, but I would like to ask you the question to get started. You guys have succeeded in college at the University of Phoenix, and then you heard the statements about the low success rate. Are you two aberrations, or do you have any comment on that? To be provocative, I just would like to get some comments.
I want to say that what probably comes into play here, I think, is the level of maturity as well, in terms of wanting your degree and completing it. I do believe that maybe younger generations that are coming out of high school, online is kind of a little more difficult for them, so they do drop out. But at my level, I'm 37 years old, so I want it. That I'm at that level where I just want it. So I think that definitely plays a role.
Sure. And Melody, you were younger when you got your BS degree there, so could you add some comments?
I think the maturity level does take a big toll on everything, but I don't know. I think I just feel like I don't know.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, that's part of what I'm picking up on. You had mentioned the fact that one of the things that really struck me at dinner last night when you were talking is I know you said that, like, with your maturity, now that you're older,
Yes.
that you have more patience. But even when you were describing what you went through as an online student, you were bullheaded. It's like, I'm not going to let things hold me back from getting my degree. You had a very strong passion to complete.
It was just self-determination. It was just, I had to do it. I couldn't fail myself. I couldn't fail my siblings. And so I just wanted to basically show them, like, regardless to what, what you've came from, what, the things that you don't have, you're still capable of doing those things.
Okay, thank you.
If I can make a comment, I think that once a student decides they're going to go into higher education, whether it be an online university system, the University of California, Cal State, community college, that student has made a choice, and a conscious choice, to pursue a degree. So I believe that at that moment in time, it is the institution's responsibility to ensure that student's success. And so while some people may say, well, that student wanted it, I didn't want it, maturity levels, I think that may be an individual factor to consider, but that can't be the deciding factor whether or not that student succeeds at the university system. And I believe that a 4% graduation rate, there can't be 96% of the student population that does not want that degree, having had already invested time, effort, and energy into pursuing their degree. So that's just my...
institutions have some response, sure. But Isa?
I wanted to ask you guys, as they had those numbers up there based on demographically in California how students are achieving education. How does that make you feel, based on the one that you identify with? How does that make you feel seeing those numbers, and more importantly, what does that look like in your own community, where you're coming from? Why do you think those numbers are the way they are, and what are you actually seeing, in real life, in the people that you're around who maybe aren't going to college?
I would like to just add to answer that, but also I just would like to say I appreciate the work that all three of you do and the organizations that you represent. I know sometimes it's controversial topics, but it's the truth and it's honesty, and I think sometimes some people might not want to hear that, and so I appreciate you, being honest with what you're coming at us with. And I think we have a very diverse group of student panelists, and I know we all can't speak for our, prospective, ethnic groups or anything, but this is something that we need to keep in mind. And I know we just had our faculty panelist here. I think this is something, as all of us represent our different organizations and campuses, we have to realize that there are underdogs out there, and there's people that are trying to go through the system, and that's what has to keep us passionate about going above and beyond and going to help others experience higher education and give back in that way. So I appreciate you bringing that forward, and I hope that all of us take that from this, that we have to support each other in any way that we can going through higher education in this state.
I think for me, I would like to piggyback on how you say we kind of sell ourselves short. Because like I said, I came from a rough background, and people telling me that you can't do it, I think that was just taking the short way out. And so I worked in a juvenile hall before, and so I always encourage the students, no matter, even though you're in juvenile hall, you can still make changes. And so don't sell yourself short. Strive for your goals, and try to make your career change everything.
Are they listening to you?
Yes, some of them. Some of them.
Sorry, this is my level or my area of interest. I am incredibly proud to have been brought up in a Latino community, in a Latino household. Spanish is my first language, and it is incredibly painful to me to see that the state in higher education in K through 14 is, in my opinion, failing these students. And in large part, the conversation about online education, I have to agree with Ms. Siqueiros and Ms. How do you say your last name? Cochran? Yes. About there not being an actual target on what online education is supposed to meet, what goal or what issue it's supposed to meet. Because in my conversations with it, I've heard things from having it be a more cost-effective method to instruct students, having it be a way to assist students in their matriculation and actual graduation in college. It's gone to, how are we gonna have a more educated population overall? And so it's almost like a moving target, and we're trying to fit the model into the need that we see that is most pressing right now. And for me, if we could make the need actually educating the students that we are systematically failing at every level, then I could say, okay, there's a reason for online education, there's an actual goal, and I can be completely behind it.
Yeah, Scott?
And I do think the conversation's moved in the last year because we were in this rationing period, and I was waiting for a policy proposal that was going to say 20% of all classes have to be taught online. I mean, some of you that have worked, you could see that would come down from on high. And it's like, oh my God, because I've been in a lot of these discussions. I was with the New York Times having this conversation with some of the best and brightest. You just had some of the best and brightest. But we know that you can't just say, 20% of community college faculty are ready to teach outstanding courses online, because you were talking about what was an effective faculty course, number one, or online course. It was an engaged faculty member. It was interactivity. It wasn't just going back to the days when we had closed circuit television on cable channels and you'd watch and that served one population. That's not going to be the expansion that we need. Now you see the governor saying, here's some money, $50 million for innovation, faculty-led innovation, not from system offices, but faculty-led innovation. And you also see, and I'm from one of the previous panels, Rich brought up the issue of, why do 112 different community colleges have different online course platforms. When 30% of the students are taking classes at multiple colleges, and a huge number, thousands of part-time faculty teaching multiple colleges, everybody's got to use a different system. That would be like every time you go to your bank, the ATM is different. You have a different PIN for every branch. That's how we've been running things, and I think that might be changing.
Thank you.
I want to piggyback. Oh, yeah.
Sorry about that.
I would also like to piggyback. Sorry. But really, if I could just add to some of these statements, I think that what really needs to happen is we really need to have more conversations like this. We need to bring together all constituency groups that are impacted by higher education, whether that is by higher education and online education, to have conversations like what we're having now. We're taking steps in the right direction, but we're still acting in silos. We're still separate systems. We're separate campuses even within the same system that are doing all sorts of different things, but we can't seem to collect a database of what everyone's doing. One thing that we're doing at the California State Student Association, CSSA, one of our students who's actually on staff with us, his name's Anthony Gibson. He's a student at Sacramento State. He actually headed up it's a white paper that we wrote, but it basically outlines priorities from the eyes of students surrounding online education specifically. And we have a meeting in Fullerton next weekend, and we're hoping to approve it. But it touches on things like quality, it touches on access, the platform, all these different things where we see discrepancies and we see differences and different philosophies from different campuses and different systems. And it's really helping us take some steps in the right direction because, everyone's talking about online education, but we aren't coming together consistently enough. We aren't bringing students, faculty, legislators, administrators. We aren't bringing everyone together consistently enough. And we're really trying to take some steps in the right direction to bring everyone on board with what's going on with online education, and really trying to bring those opinions to the same table.
Thank you.
Rich, you want to say something?
Just before we get off of the topic of the different demographic success rates, I go to the Peralta Community College District in Oakland and Berkeley, Emeryville, those northern or East Bay cities. And while I served on the Board of Trustees there as the student member of the board, we were dealing with our equity report. And, in our equity report, we talk about the different demographics that we serve and how we're doing and mostly how we're failing and those sorts of things. But in my experience in Peralta, which has been moderately extensive, it has become fairly apparent that when we talk about dealing with really complex, really important issues like closing those gaps, it's not something that we can just deal with in the community colleges. It's not something that we can just deal with in higher education. It's not something we can just deal with in education. When one of our students, or 5 in a year, get shot walking down the street and we have an obituary on, in the campus newspaper or whatever, that's a problem that drives students out of college. That's a problem that, Senator Mitchell mentioned the abysmal success rates in Oakland public schools. And as long as we're talking about how to move forward with a plan for the state on online education, in my opinion, that's something that we need to deal with all levels of our schools. Social services can provide laptops to low-income families. Why not? That's an incredibly important resource that is almost as important as shoes or something. That having internet and access to information right now in our society, that defines your mobility and your ability to get a job. So I think that we need to really pull in a much larger conversation when we're dealing with a plan for education.
And I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, great. Well, I just wanted to piggyback really quickly off something Melody said that really hit me and I think is really significant when you said I was selling myself short. And I speak to students all around the country, mostly at community colleges, and they come up to me and I see in their eyes that they have been selling themselves short most of their life. That they have been receiving messages, a lot of them subconscious, that they are not worthy. I did not think I was worthy of a master's degree. I wouldn't have said that if you had asked me, oh yeah, sure, I can do anything I want in the world. This is America. But subconsciously, when I got a scholarship to get a master's degree, I literally got weak in the knees and bawled my eyes out because I didn't actually think that was something I'd ever do. And I think, there are a lot of students who are selling themselves short. And for me, what changed as well, not only having the money to do it, that's huge, but also I had professors who would call me out and say, here's what I see in you, here's what I think you should do, and I think you should be a leader. I never saw myself doing something like this right here, right now, 5 years ago. And it was people who spoke that into me. So I wanted to just ask you guys, have there been any mentors or role models, or what helped you not sell yourself short? Because this is a very successful group. You are what we want for all of our students. What kept you dreaming big? And then do you have any suggestions for how we can, bring that hope to scale, and how maybe, as since we are talking about online, how we can make sure we don't miss that important component as we talk about online as a way to close gaps?
For me, I had to just come to the realization that I had to face my fears, and being able to face my fears and go after something that I thought was also impossible was I don't know, it's unexplainable. To me, it's a very it's pretty emotional for me, because I've gone through so much, just to get to where I'm at, and seeing my kids look at me now and say, wow, my dad's going to college, what college am I going to be going to, and I'm sending a message not only to my friends and saying, hey, I can do it, you can do it, but also, most importantly, are my kids, because I know technology is going to be at the forefront in the future, and they are going to learn, they are going to need to know at least, the basis of computer, technology, and so that's it.
We have time for one more student response to that question, or?
Okay, sorry, I feel like I'm dominating the conversation. But so I think this question is a really important question, and I think it directly relates to the success rates of certain populations, namely the Latino and African American populations, right? And so when anybody asks me the question of who inspired me or helped me get through, I say my mother. She's an amazing woman. She has taught me everything that I know, ranging from hard work, dedication, commitment, drive, self-determination, and for me, it's important to recognize those attributes in order for you not to sell yourself short, beginning in the household, right? So a lot of the times this negative reinforcement happens or occurs in the environments in which we are raised, right? And so it's important to think of ourselves and think of our immediate family members as those individuals that have those qualities that are not far removed from who we are, and that we should explore options and avenues that allow for us to manifest those skills or those characteristics as well. And so my mom, without knowing, with third grade education, political refugee or refugee from El Salvador, has mentored me in incredible ways, and I am my mother's daughter. That's why I'm so successful, I believe. It's because I try to be half the person that she is. She's amazing.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Well, I'd like to thank our final panel for Michelle, Debbie, and Scott. I appreciate your time here for this conversation. But I also want to, in particular, recognize the student panel. This has been invaluable. They asked us to sort of give some wrap-up thoughts, and the most obvious one is what the purpose of this conference was. We need to hear directly from students what you guys are really going through. And so one of the things that really struck me wasn't just the fact that you guys were open and could speak at these very, the different levels, but there's also a level of inspiration here as well. The hard work, I'm working full-time, I'm gonna get my job, I'm not gonna let my background hold me back. and I'm going to go back and help others. So there's been a real inspiration here, as well as an identification of here's what students need to be successful. So I definitely want to really thank the student panel, thank 20 Million Minds for setting up the conference so that we could hear from them. We need more of this. And I'm speaking not just here to 20 Million Minds, I'm speaking to EDUCAUSE, I'm speaking to WCET, to the GSV advisors. We have so many conferences going on talking about educational innovation, and this is the most I've heard where students are directly involved in the conversation. So I personally want to put out a challenge that we need to change this. There needs to be a panel like this in the other conferences moving forward and actually hear from students and get them to be able to also answer or address what they're hearing from presenters. So that's what really struck me today is great student panel, we need more of this. And I also, final thought is the fact that it's got to be targeted solution. We have to understand, I think it was brought up very well here, what problem are we trying to solve? It can't be nebulous, we need more. It's got to be, we're increasing access and the access to a quality education that students can complete. We need to be specific so that we can then come in with holistic solutions and help our students in California actually complete their degrees, complete their transfer, whatever their educational goals are. So one thing that struck me, it was a very good conversation, not on abstract terms, but on very specifics of what do I need to meet my goals of getting a degree, getting a credential. So, so this has been a great panel. That's sort of my takeaway thoughts as we've done it, and I'd like to see if there's anything from Isa.
Sure, I think for final thoughts, I'm reminded of a statement I made in my very first speech I ever gave 3 years ago, and I also wrote this in my book. And I said, no matter how technological our world gets, opportunities happen through people. And I think this panel today has just confirmed that technology is not an answer, it's a great tool, but we have to remember the people not only creating it and what progress that can make, but also remembering that students still need support. They still want to be engaging with faculty. They don't want just this screen in front of them. They want to have that human interaction, and I think there is incredible growth and incredible beauty and incredible opportunity in that. And I just want to thank all of you for being here today, for caring so much, and everyone who served as a panel for all the work that you're doing. And then again, to our just incredible students. You're the reason why people work so hard, and you're also, I see, the future leaders who are going to be on this side and changing things, and that's what makes me very excited. So thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I'd like to bring Dean Flores back up to the stage and thank you for everything you've done.
Thank you. You got it. Let's give Phil Hill and Isa Adney a huge hand for doing all this. And let's also give our students a huge hand for sitting this long through all of this thing and adding their voices. Very much appreciated. And for everyone who flew in and the panelists, thank you so much. I mean, I can tell you that, as Phil said, we've been to so many conferences where the student voice just isn't there. And in fact, most of the time we somehow make some assumptions, particularly on online, that we really need to check in with students. So I would, maybe if the governor's office is listening somewhere, and I know they're tuned in, maybe having a full-time student panel to vet all online legislation would be great. So Cynthia, you're in charge of that. So just so you know that. And, but if I could say, again, we need more of these. Phil's right. We need to travel. We need to vet. We need to look at everything that's coming out. $16.9 million in terms of the governor's investment is really just the first down payment to do online correct. And I think, as I heard the students, what needs to happen with online is a lot of scaffolding of a lot of support services that make it workable. And that's going to cost some money. And if you think about it, it means faculty development. It means faculty time. We need this new rising category of instructional design that needs to be built into almost everything that we're talking about today to make it really workable. And that's important. How many of you, most of us probably went to college, but how many of you had one of these really, really bad courses? Raise your hand. Like a really bad course you would never put anyone through. So if we just put that online and run it over and over and over, why would we ever want to do that 24/7? So the key is to make sure we design courses that are really made for students and that really engage students in a very serious way. Now let me just close and say that at the end of this conference always comes something that most of you have seen from last year's conference, and that is a trek and a discussion with our legislators. So if I can just summarize the three big things I heard today from a policy point of view and some milestones for the 20 Million Minds Foundation, is first and foremost maybe building upon Senator Padilla's transfer legislation in terms of looking at all of the courses necessary for an articulated view through all three systems has to have an online component, and we have to recognize these courses. So if you're taking an online course in stats, stats is stats is stats is stats in all three systems. That would make it a lot easier. And we need to build upon Senator Padilla's legislation to start, if you will, kind of overlaying the online environment in those discussions. That's going to make it a lot easier. And we'll hopefully see Senator Padilla now move even further before he is termed out in these last couple of months. And Michelle will probably look to you to have that discussion. I also think that in terms of online coordination, as been mentioned, we probably need to have more discussions with our faculty. This is a year of faculty ownership. Clearly last year was a year of faculty resistance. There's no doubt about it. Last year was, we're digging in, this is our curriculum, this is our university, and we're going to offer our students high quality, flexible courses. The next step this year then is, how do we do that? Who funds it? And ultimately, who is getting together to make this workable? So if faculty are going to own these courses, then we really need to band together and go to Sacramento and try to figure out what that package looks like, not just from a governor's point of view, but I think from a system point of view. Two other things. Credit coordination was kind of mentioned, but not. Again, the credit is a credit, and we really need to try to figure out, if we are going to online environments, how do we grant the credit in a way that the institutions own it? And I think I mentioned right at the beginning of this, the math dilemma, the basic skills bottleneck. Michelle's talked a lot about this in some sense in some of the reports. The reality is that we have 2.4 million students in our California community colleges. A good half of them are 3 levels below in developmental math. Only 25% of all our courses are aimed at that. We immediately have a structural bottleneck. Kids are waiting 2 semesters to get the course necessary, to get the credit necessary to take science. And we need to solve that. And if online isn't part of that equation, we're never going to be able to scale up from a physical plant perspective to offer the courses necessary for students to have a path to completion. That means that only 6% meet their goals in 3 years. That's just not a workable solution. So online has to be part of that discussion. And I would reach out even further than Phil, than some of our partners. I would reach out to the vendors out there, McGraw-Hill, Pearson, Cengage, after being reconfigured. The goal is to really ask and challenge you to come with products that meet the developmental English and developmental math categories, and I'd be remiss to say English as a second language issues with technology, and to make sure that you have the support necessary to make sure students are successful. The last thing I would say is that we need content coordination. Phil mentioned it a minute ago. OER, free open material, shared material, all important. There still is a cost factor for our students here. How many of you guys buy your books the first day of school, the first day? Okay. Books cost money. Content should be shared. We need to make sure as we build these courses out that we have shared content that is built into online that's free to the student. There's no doubt about that. So with that, I'll just simply say we do have some big policy perspectives from the foundation's goals in terms of Sacramento. We have friends. Holly Mitchell, again, want to thank her for coming. She's a big player in this. Daryl Steinberg's a big player in this. There's a lot of folks who will be looking this year to figure out what they're going to do with all of those bills that didn't make it to the governor. This is the last half of the game. That's normally when everybody really comes out and starts to play. So hopefully you'll see a lot more movement on the online front, but hopefully after today, we'll be able to take these learnings and go forward. The last thing I'll say is we have a Twitter feed. I would encourage you, if you missed any of this, to start from the very beginning and to reverse the process and read anything you may have missed. I think there were a lot of great comments on Twitter today. I really want to thank all those who participated. And of course, we'll have a live video transcript of this on YouTube, panel by panel, that will be available to anyone to rehash some of these issues today. So hopefully you can see that as well. The last thing, of course, I'd be remiss to say thank you to Dr. Gary Michelson and Alia Michelson for allowing us to do the work we do at 20 Million Minds. We're very thankful and of great support from our founder. And the last point would be, I need to introduce some people that made all this happen. Myra Lambera, Sergio Rojas, Reed Milburn, Suzanne, Paul, and Liz Gonzalez. Thank you so much for putting all this together. And the last thing is, the good thing about this conference is you get to walk down 3 floors, not up. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it.